Thank you very much indeed, and I'm really sorry not to be with you in person. Hopefully today's my last day of isolation. So I'll try to take you through a regulated perspective, and it's been very interesting for me listening to the previous presentation, hopefully amplify some of the points that were made there. So I'm just going to share my screen and bring the presentation up. So here we go. So as has already been said, this is a huge transition, faster than the transition that shipping had to make from sail to steam some 200 years ago, and it's not driven by money and economics, which makes it doubly challenging. And I thought I'd maybe start with some of the practicalities. So I wanted to just spend a couple of minutes talking about not the transition solutions, but the endpoint solutions, the zero carbon solutions, what the suite of potential answers are for shipping. And I guess just wanted to go through some things that have been going through my mind, really. I mean, the first one, hopefully everyone at the conference is already well aware of. Liquefied natural gas really does little or nothing for global warming compared with heavy fuel oils. Helps with NOx and SOx, but it really doesn't help in terms of CO2 emissions, certainly not substantially. And currently with methane slip levels, it's just as bad for global warming as heavy fuel oil is. And that's a matter of chemistry. The second one, I think, a lot of talk about biofuels, and I think those could be interesting in small pockets of the sector. But if we do the maths on it, they're just not scalable. And anyway, aviation is going to have the first call on those. Aviation's far more energy density sensitive than shipping is. But if you looked at the amount of the world's arable land that would need to be converted to growing crops to supply biofuels to supply all of aviation and shipping, it'd be literally half the arable land in the world. So I just wanted to get that out on the table there. Biofuels are not really a scalable solution. I think the next one, the previous speaker talked a little bit about make it both completely impractical on any sort of scale from an energy perspective, and also if you look at the size of the equipment required, it pretty much defies imagination. So I'd say that whether we're talking about methanol or other synthetic hydrocarbons, as zero carbon fuels, as endpoint fuels, those are not practical. Battery powered shipping, great for ranges up to a couple of 100 miles-ish, with known advances in batteries. And I think for the shorter international routes, pressurized hydrogen's got an energy density maybe 6 times as great as batteries, whether that's on a volume or weight basis. So potentially batteries and hybrid pressurized hydrogen solutions quite interesting for short, medium haul shipping. So our analysis would say the most likely destinations in terms of those endpoint fuels, again, I stress this is not transition, this is endpoint fuels. The most likely destinations, I think we would say on the larger ships, which will be sort of global transocean shipping, the likely solutions sit around ammonia, hydrogen. I've got nuclear in brackets there. Kind of tough to talk about nuclear. It's just not got the level of public support at the moment. And I guess that might well change. But those, I think, for us are the 3 clear front runner options for larger shipping. For the smaller shipping that's more locally based, electric and maybe pressurized hydrogen hybrid. So I wanted just to get that out on the table, because I guess in terms of the work we do as a regulator, that makes a substantial difference in informing our thinking. So I think it's already been said, the challenge of decarbonisation in shipping, it's partly about the ships, but it's much wider than that. And I think what's interesting for shipping, unlike aviation maybe, is that the solutions I suspect that end up being implemented already exist in some shape or form. I don't think we're going to see brand new radical solutions. So we've sort of got the suite of solutions there. Some need a little bit more technological advancement. There's more work to be done on burning ammonia in engines, but engine manufacturers are making huge progress on that. And there are ways of breaking ammonia down into hydrogen, which would allow it to be more easily burned. Similarly, some of the nuclear options, molten salt reactors, still require a degree of technological finessing. Last column I've got on this table really is how involved the MCA is getting in all of this. We are engaged in that technological advancement where members, along with Lloyd's Register, interestingly, of the Maritime Technologies Forum that brings together a number of maritime administrations and classification societies globally, really to look at the pros and cons and what needs doing to make decarbonisation possible. So I've only put the sort of RAG rating on technological as yellow. I think those technological issues will get resolved. Economic, again, this has been talked about. Future fuels will be more expensive, and that means market measures need to be created to incentivize their use, either globally or in green corridors, bilateral agreements, or within groups of countries. And I think one of the big changes in the sector over the last 2 or 3 years that I've seen has been a recognition that those market measures need to be put in place, and some real demand for some clarity on what those measures might look like. The MCA is not engaged in looking at market measures. That's very much with Department for Transport within the UK. Similarly, financing mechanisms will be required for ship owners and also for new infrastructure required. And there's some quite big questions about where technological risk is priced in and who pays for that. We're very engaged with a financial working group along with Maritime London and a number of financial institutions, and just starting to make some recommendations to DFT around those financing mechanisms. So that is an area in which the MCA is very involved. I think one of the big changes is infrastructure, whether we're talking about hydrogen, ammonia, or even battery power. Again, it's been touched on: manufacture, distribution, storage, fueling. The scale of this is quite mind-boggling. So I guess when I was a baby engineer many years ago, and rather coincidentally involved in the design, build and operation of ammonia, hydrogen and methanol plants, we'd be building world-scale ammonia plants at a cost of about, in today's terms, about £500 million each. Obviously using fossil fuel technology at that time. To put scale on it, one of those world-scale ammonia plants would create enough output to supply continuously 2 of the 20,000 TEU container ships. So assuming that the new technology is not going to be cheaper than fossil fuel technology, and I think we can say that's almost certainly the case, what we're seeing there is potentially a doubling of the capital cost of each new 20,000 TEU container ship capacity because of the infrastructure that has to be built in order to refuel it. So just thought, again, it's worth lodging the scale of this in people's minds. Are there big engineering challenges? Well, there are engineering challenges, but they're understood and I think well on the track to resolution. At the end of the day, it's usually not the engineering challenges here that trip us up and create the problems. And again, MCA is very closely in touch with that and working closely with partners at Lloyd's Register on that. But the engineering is not causing me massive concern. I think what is more challenging probably is the change in operation that these new fuels are going to require. So it really doesn't matter whether we're talking about hydrogen or ammonia or nuclear. These new fuels require a quite different level of safety standards on board ships. They're harder to handle, they're volatile, they're either of that ship. It's very different to heavy fuel oil. And arguably, seafarer training is already some decades behind where it ideally would be, given the way that technology has advanced in shipping. So I think I'd make a strong case here that shipping as a whole is going to go through a level of operational change that it hasn't quite got its heads around yet. I think there are some parts of the sector which are already there, and I'd probably pull out gas tankers and cruise ships, where they're either already handling these fuels or are so reputationally sensitive that they've had to haul themselves up. But I think the rest of the sector is going to go through really quite a mind-blowing change in operational standards. And the MCA is very involved at the moment with stakeholders around the maritime sector in overhauling the seafarer training, the seafaring officer training that's provided in the UK. Very keen to keep the UK front and centre globally of seafaring officer training. So, and I think you won't be surprised, having heard all of that, that I'd also place safety in general in as a red here, a really major area of concern. Again, interesting to reflect, the previous speaker touched on it, those big 20,000 TEU container ships would contain either 2,000 tonnes of liquid hydrogen or 8,000 tonnes of liquid ammonia in their bunkers. And those cities would go, those ships would go into ports, most of which are either inside or on the edges of big cities. And I'm sat here in Southampton thinking we might have 3 or 4 of those tied up at any point in time. So somewhere between 6,000 tonnes of hydrogen, maybe 25,000 tonnes of ammonia sat in the middle of Southampton in big container ships bunkers at any point in time. Really interesting. When I was running ammonia storage facilities on land, I was running one of the high hazard sites in the UK, which had 3,000 tonnes of ammonia in it. So an eighth of the amount that we have in Southampton. And I was regulated up to the eyeballs on it. And there's no such regulation exists currently in port. So there are some really serious challenges for us to build a regulatory regime, probably through best practice, initially moving into mandatory regulation in time, but to build a regulatory regime for handling, storage and transfer of these new fuels in ports, and to do it in the UK in a way that interfaces with whatever's created globally. I think, you know, if it doesn't take a huge stretch of your imagination, given world events at the moment, to start to see some of the national security issues that start to potentially flow out of all of that as well. Now, I'm sure all of these things are resolvable, but I think my point here is there's quite a lot of work to do on working them through and figuring out how to deal with them. And I think coming to shipping regulation, mainstream shipping regulation, we're entering a time where ships employing new technologies, new fuels, or increased levels of automation, for which the highly detailed regulation, which is shipping regulation, doesn't exist. Those ships will need to be certified on a case-by-case basis. I'm very conscious of that as a regulator. That's going to increase massively our workload. And again, talking with Lloyd's and other classification societies about how we work with them in getting new ships certified. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. I think, though, the punchline here is that there will become much more onus in the future for operators to understand and mitigate risk themselves. And again, I would argue that's quite a big change for shipping. So to summarise what the MCA is engaged in here, obviously we're front and centre of IMO negotiations along with colleagues in Foreign Office and DFT. Engaged in a lot of implementation pilot projects, and we'll be doing more of those over time. Very engaged in ensuring we get new vessels certified using exemptions, equivalences and so on. Starting to work on port regulation, and we will do that with the port sector. Thinking about the structure of new technology regulation, working on financing, engaged in a very active seafarer training overhaul. We've been making changes to UK tonnage tax, which are and to the UK flag, which are intended to suck more shipping companies into the UK and to create some UK benefit out of all that we're doing, and a sort of concierge service that also helps to suck customers into the UK. So just to touch on regulation and the likely change, if we think about two periods of regulation. First of all, the transition time. So as we're testing out these new fuels and implementing them for the first time, we're going to have to use safety cases produced by the operators, probably with help from classification societies. I'll come on to a little bit more detail in this on this later, but very, very early engagement with the MCA is going to be the key to getting that novel technology certified on board new ships. We've also got to start thinking about replacement of current regulation. Shipping regulation is quite unusual now in safety terms. It's highly prescriptive, built from bottom up, very different to land-based regulation, which is built from a safety case downward. I'm not sure we're going to have time as a sector to build the level of detail that we're used to from the bottom up, and it does seem to me that another of the big changes that's going to happen globally in shipping is for operators to have to take more of the onus of thinking about the risks that they're taking on and satisfying regulators that they have taken on those risks responsibly. That will be a massive change. I'm also conscious in the MCA that we've not yet adequately engaged with the shipping insurance sector, which I'm sure will be quite a driver alongside the regulators in setting the tone for the future. So this is my last slide, really repeating, I think, that if you're going to start building ships with technologies which aren't currently covered by the existing prescriptive regulation regime, you're going to have to start thinking about taking a risk-based approach and getting together a safety case which you can work through with the regulator. We'll be issuing some guidance on this in the next few weeks. We're just talking with the sector about exactly how we do this. I think the biggest thing here of all is, for goodness sake, engage with us really, really early on in the design process, and we can work alongside you to get this done. We're only just reaching the end now of unraveling all the problems that have existed from one project where the ship was built and then they asked us to certify it, and it's taken a lot of time to work through how to ensure that that ship's safe. So overriding message here is please make sure you engage with us really early. Thank you. That was it.
Brian, please, thank you very much. That was an incredible insight into some of the issues. And we've actually got some extra time because, in fact, David Williams is unable to make it. He's also suffering from COVID. And so I probably, with the organizers' permission, I'd like to take a few questions now. So if there's any questions, I'll relay them to you. So have we got any questions for the MCA, for Brian? No? I have a quick question for you. One of the things we did in the nuclear industry was we embedded the nuclear regulator in the design process. And it might be an idea, as you've got shipbuilders here, and particularly small shipbuilders, who you recognise might be the opportunity for hydrogen. Would that be a way of dealing with some of this and developing the regulation quickly in cahoots, if you like, with the builders?
Yeah, I'm sure there's a three-way conversation needs to happen. I think the relationship between the regulator and the classification society, I'm certain, is going to change subtly, and I think you're quite right. We do need to also form a relationship with those who are building the ship. So I'd thoroughly welcome that. I guess to be honest, we're at really early days of trying to get our minds around the shape of that. It's quite a right now it's quite a daunting task thinking about replacing. You all there know the volumes of regulations that exist for the current available technologies. It's quite daunting looking at what we would have to do to replace that for hydrogen, ammonia, and whatever else. So I think we're going to have to find a much better way of working. And yeah, I'd really welcome the chance to work with the shipbuilding sector on that. I think that's a real must, actually.
And are there any other questions before I let Brian go back to his final piece of the isolation? I think you've, one in the corner, yes. The question is, Brian, do you have the right level of resource and expertise, i.e. suitably qualified and experienced personnel to deal with this? And
I wish I could give the.
How do you grow them?
I wish I could give the answer to that is yes. So I suppose my own lying awake worrying issue just now is we've got some cracking resource in the MCA, but you can see from the technologies two things. One, there's a bundle of new technologies that we're going to have to learn about, and even learning about different chemicals, for example. That's not the sort of expertise that's existed within the MCA. So we're going to have to broaden our technological capabilities, and also learn to do safety case type of regulation rather more regularly. It's not something we do very often at the moment. So we've got to build our skills in two directions. And it's a really tough recruitment market because everyone's after the same resource at the moment. So I guess, it's another reason we're talking a lot with colleagues in classification societies around how we operate jointly together. So we've still got work to do there. I guess what I'd hope you take encouragement from is that we can see what the challenge is and we're working on it, and we know what the gaps are that we've got to fill. We're pushing things quite hard, but I'm not going to pretend for a second that this is straightforward.
Thank you. Any other questions? If you were able to control the whole thing, Brian, and what would be your solution to this, given the network, the liaison you've got on, and where you'd start and how it would work? What would be your prognosis for how it could all happen?
So I suppose two things. How it could all happen. I genuinely think trying to reach consensus in the IMO amongst all of the countries is extremely unlikely. I do think that green corridors and smaller coalitions of the willing is going to be the way that we actually start to make some real progress, some localized agreements, and then expanding those out. I think that's inevitable. I think technologically, my money's probably on ammonia, but it's quite a close run thing. That's only because liquid hydrogen's so devilishly hard to deal with. And I guess there's an outside chance that we find the associated infrastructures too hard and end up having to reconsider nuclear as an option. But as I said at the beginning, that's still kind of hard to imagine. But I suppose those would be my sort of personal predictions on it.
And I suppose then, in fact, that case, it opens up a market for you, because if you bring people under your flag, under the red duster, if you like, suddenly they'll come to you for regulation. So there's an opportunity as well as a challenge.
So you've absolutely got it. I think we're in a really binary position for the UK. I think either we grab this challenge and we can absolutely revitalise the maritime economy, or many parts of the maritime economy. I genuinely believe there's an opportunity with this. I think we've got some real strength in depth, and I think we've got some insights into what the sort of breadth of system change is that's required. And if we can show ourselves able as a nation to make that system change happen, I think we become a very, very good home for shipping, whether that's through companies coming into the UK and joining UK tonnage tax, or joining the UK flag, or simply coming into the UK. I think the UK's got a huge amount to offer, and I think we'd be really remiss if we didn't make the most of this opportunity. I genuinely think it is an opportunity. I think the UK's got something really quite special to offer here.
Brian, that's super. One or two people have got a couple of questions. There's a question at the back and then one at the other side. Could you talk out loud? Speak up, please. The question goes back to the point about embedding, really. How does an owner or a builder or someone in the supply chain start to think about how they design and build when the regulations don't exist? And I won't preempt you. I'm interested in your thoughts.
I think the principle here is by sort of thinking top down about the likely risks and hazards that you might be introducing. And I think, you know, if you're, as an organization, if you're used to thinking in that way, that'll be quite familiar territory for you. If you're not, I'd say engage quickly with one of your classification societies. Will be able to help to give some advice and help you to put together a safety case. And I do think one of the things we've learned recently is it's really important to get the operator who's wanting to get the ship built, the classification society who's both potentially working with the operator to put the safety case together, but also engaged as the classification society of that operator and the regulator together. Getting that three-way conversation moving right from the outset, I think, is absolutely fundamental to this. But it will all be on the basis of thinking about and understanding the risk that you're taking. So let me give an example. If you've got a vessel driven off pressurized hydrogen, clearly one of the hazards is leaks. Where are you going to put those pressurized hydrogen tanks in relation to anything that's flammable or people? How are you going to keep it ventilated? A lot of it's kind of obvious questions, but that's why the dialogue from very early on is so important, because questions that might seem obvious to one of the three parties we're talking with Lloyd's and others about that discussion happening quickly and in a collaborative way. And as I said before, we'll get some guidance out over the next few weeks to everyone, so it's there in much more in black and white.
Thank you very much. And we've got one more question at the back, and then I think probably we're going to have to finish off. Yes. The question is, the background is, in the previous energy transition, it wasn't maritime that led it, it was another industry.
Yeah.
And does maritime have sufficient scale to lead this transition, or would it be better working with electricity, or is there another sector that would be better placed?
I think, yes? Great question. Great question. I don't know where the lead comes from, in honesty, because I think A hydrogen-based solution could be ammonia for ships, where it might be hydrogen on land, and that's simply because ships contain such huge quantities of fuel compared with land-based applications. So there are some peculiarities of shipping, but shipping can't act alone on this. So I think, if ports are looking at bunkering capacity and supply of those decarbonised fuels, and potentially even manufacture of those decarbonised fuels, they'll only be able to do that in the context of the broader demand that's potentially there for those fuels around the port, as well as the shipping demand. So I'm not quite sure, it's a bit of a moot point as to where the lead comes from on this. But ports won't be able to put the infrastructure in place without thinking about the broader demand situation and what's needed for other sectors. So I'm afraid it's only half an answer. This isn't easy stuff.
Brian, I think we're going to draw stumps here now and say thank you very much. That was an amazing and very coherent insight to the problems you face and potentially some of the solutions. But I don't envy you the task, but thank you very much indeed for giving us the time and incredible insight into the future. Thank you.